Hello, my name is Mark Ellis from Stick and Rudder Studios, and today I want to take you through Numeric Datarefs for X-KeyPad 1.5 and kind of walk you through what those are all about. So the agenda for this tutorial video is to discuss exactly what is a numeric data ref, how it can be used, what is this number buffer that you may have heard mentioned in other tutorial videos, and then we're going to walk through the C172 virtual samples use of numeric data refs. And although we are going to be using the virtual device sample, understand that for the most part, numeric data refs work exactly the same way if you use them on hardware devices like the PI Engineering X-Keys keyboards. So a numeric data ref, exactly what is this? Well, it is a writable data ref that can be defined on a key. And the major difference between it and something like logic data ref is the logic data ref is it only has to be read-only. You may recall, I may have mentioned this, that when an aircraft designer designs an interface to the plane and he defines these data refs, he could define them by, the various types they are, whether they're integers, floats, doubles. He can also decide whether or not that data ref can be written to by external things like plugins or plywood Lua and things of that nature, or whether they just want it to be a read-only where the aircraft designer is exposing a numeric value of something that's going on inside the plane, but he doesn't want you to be able to change it outside maybe operations within the 3D cockpit. So for us, a numeric data ref, it has to be writable because our intent is we're actually going to try to manipulate it. So it can represent simulated data that you would like to set with a number. One of the things you can do with an X-KeyPad is you can enter in digits into this thing called the number buffer, which we're going to discuss in a minute. And then when you click or touch a key, that number in the number buffer can actually get written to a numeric data ref. So where we use this in X-KeyPad is to do things like, type in or basically punch in a COM frequency, maybe a transponder code, autopilot parameters like heading bug, course, altitude hold, auto throttle speed. These are typically things that if you had a full-blown cockpit, you would do with rotary encoders. But rotary encoders, they're kind of complicated to set up unless you do a full cockpit. And this is just an alternative way for you to be able to get data like this into a wide variety of aircraft without having to have a lot of extra hardware like rotary encoders and things like that on your simulator. It can also represent simulated data that you would like to increment and decrement. As I may have mentioned it before, sometimes you're going to find situations in aircraft where the aircraft designer did not bother to give you commands to operate some of the things within the 3D cockpit. In our example, we're going to actually use the transponder mode to show you this. Now, in the Cessna 172, there is actually commands to increment the transponder mode up, or increment the transponder mode down. But sometimes you're going to find planes where the aircraft designer never gave you a command, but they did give you a writable data ref that might show you something like the transponder mode. It's not just the transponder mode; it could be a wide variety of things that you can see. So that's one of the other things we can do with numeric data refs is increment them up and down with operation zone key presses. So this number buffer, what actually is going on with this thing? So inside X-KeyPad, it's a text string that X-KeyPad is maintaining. And it stores the character representation of the number you might like to use to set a data ref. So an example, if I wanted to set COM1 to 121.5 megahertz, what the number buffer is going to have in it is the characters 1, 2, 1, decimal point 5. Okay? And this numeric buffer can get manipulated with special commands, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. These special commands allow you to do things like append a digit 0 to 9 to the buffer, remove the previous digit, like you may have hit a backspace key on in a text editor. It allows you to clear the buffer entirely and wipe it out. And what's going to happen is when you press a key that's got a numeric data ref on it, the contents of whatever is in the number buffer is going to get converted, okay, to the proper data ref type, whether that be an integer or a float, or whatever the data ref's defined as, and it'll get written to that, data ref. So here are the commands, okay, that you see. There's like SRS X-KeyPad, keypad 0, which will append a 0 character to the numeric buffer on through the various digits, and then you have a decimal point, a minus sign, clear, and the backspace command. And you might ask yourself, well, why did you do these as commands? And the reason we did it this way is that you have a lot of choice with X-KeyPad as to how you want to, what device you want to use for entering this numeric data. Most people will define the keypad right within either their PI Engineering hardware keyboard. You'll see it a lot in all the virtual samples that I've done, as I created a little array of keys that look like a numeric keypad within the virtual devices that you can click on or touch if you have a touch monitor. But you might actually decide to map these to things like a keyboard keypad, or any other hardware device that can look like a game controller, where you can put numbers or put characters into the character stream of X-Plane. So that's enough talking in PowerPoint presentation. Why don't we actually get right into X-Plane and take a look at the Cessna 172 sample, and we're going to see how we use numeric datarefs for some various operations. Okay, so here we are in X-Plane. We've got the trusty Cessna 172 loaded, and I've actually got this already configured for the Cessna 172 sample. I think you've seen some of the other videos how we can, start off from blank and do an append to append that sample, but I've already done that. So we're just going to come in here and we're going to bring up the X-KeyPad configuration editor. And I'm also going to quickly come over here and drag over this virtual device to show you what it looks like. And we're going to go through here and show you how this works. So if you recall over here, you could see these red keys here that have got the clear, the minus 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the keys that I've defined that have got those commands on it that are going to load up the number buffer. Okay, and let's just come in here and click on one here, and you'll see that if I look at the commands over here, you can see that that 7 key is actually mapped to this command SRS keypad number 7. And what I'm going to do is, as I press that key, it's a little bit challenging where this thing is, actually I think what I can do here is I can set this to always on top. That probably will help a little bit. So as I press these various keys, you're going to notice over here on the left that there's this thing called a number buffer that is getting loaded up with the characters I type. And with X-KeyPad by default, it's going to show you this number buffer right on the screen here. And you can actually move this window around a little bit. Once it's highlighted, you can drag it and put it where you want. I also happen to have it being shown within the clear key up here. You'll see this is whatever I typed in the buffer is also getting shown here. And because you could do this on virtual devices, you can show it here. There is an option in the settings dialog to actually shut this off. And I'm going to show that to you really quick here. In the numeric window, I have this option here that says show the numeric window. And if I click it, it'll make it go away. So if you happen to be using virtual devices and you choose to configure your clear key where the numeric data is being shown up here, it also, by the way, shows up here in the menu bar, just to the right of your shift key, your shift checkbox. So you have a lot of places where it shows up on virtual devices. But the challenge is if you're not using virtual devices and you're just using something like a PI Engineering hardware keyboard, you do want to see what you actually typed. So just to show you that you can turn that on and off, and you have some control over what it looks like, where you can choose the background color when this is highlighted. You could choose the text color that's on it. You could choose whether or not you always show the background. So you have a couple of options on what this looks like. Okay. Go ahead and close that. So as this number buffer is getting loaded up, and I can clear it here using the clear key. As this number buffer is getting loaded up, I can put data into it. As an example, I'm going to set the COM1 to 121.6 megahertz, 121.6, and then I just click on the COM1 key over here.
COM1 set to 121.6 megahertz.
Okay, so you can kind of see how this works. I could do things like set the heading. Maybe I want to set the heading to 89 degrees.
Heading set to 89 degrees.
Right. So lots of capabilities how you can do this. Now, why don't we actually look and see how this works okay with COM1. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get X-Plane out of the way. I'm going to pop out my window here, my editor window here, so we can kind of work with these at the same time and not have too much clutter on the screen. Okay, so let's take a look at the COM1 key and how it's defined. So what you're going to notice here is that, maybe I'll just make this a little bit smaller, this a little bit bigger. You'll notice here that on the Numeric Dataref tab, I have a Numeric Dataref defined as COM1 frequency in Hertz 833, okay? Which is basically the frequency of what COM1 is currently set to with the 8.3 or 8.3 kilohertz spacing. Now, this data ref is actually not representing hertz. It actually represents kilohertz. And now, although the data ref's not really named very clearly, that's really what it was. And you can see here, if you look at the current integer value of that data ref, it's 121,600, which is really 121,600 kilohertz, which if I then multiply that by 1,000, I would get 121.6 megahertz. Okay? So the way this key works is it has two modes of operation. If I come over to commands, you're going to notice that when I click on this COM1 key and there is no data in the number buffer, what's going to happen is that key can actually actuate a command. And I have it currently configured to do the monitor audio COM1 audio panel toggle. So as I click on this key, what's going to happen is it's simply going to turn on whether I'm monitoring COM1 on the audio panel or not. However, if I have data in the number buffer, it's not going to execute this command. It's going to come over here and it's going to jam whatever is in the number buffer into this COM1 frequency data ref. So let me show you that. I'm going to put this to 125.95. Now you'll notice that my number buffer is set to 121.95. That's what the characters are that are in there. If I come over to
COM1 set to 125.95 megahertz.
You'll notice that it set it. Now, one of the things we have to do with this is because what I entered into the number buffer was 125.95. I entered it in megahertz, but the underlying data ref wants it in kilohertz. So I have to multiply that number buffer when it gets converted to a float. I got to multiply it by 1,000, which is what I'm doing here in order to get it so that it does the right thing. Okay. If I didn't have this 1,000 in here, it would try to put in 121.95, and because this is actually an integer, this data ref, all it would have gotten was 125 without the 0.95 or in there. It would have truncated the decimal stuff, and that is a completely invalid frequency for the radio. So you do have to be aware when you're doing this, what the units are of the data ref on the covers, and then if necessary, you would put this multiply factor in here to have it converted before X-KeyPad tries to take the contents of the number buffer, convert it to a real underlying number like an integer or float, and then actually try to store it into that data ref. Okay, and there's a number of places where we've also done this. If we take a look at the transponder mode here,
Transponder ident.
transponder ident, I have the same thing. I've got this numeric data ref. It's the transponder code. I don't have to do a multiply here because it's actually representing the code under the covers. Like I can put in 5236.
Transponder set to 5236. Transponder ident.
Right? And you'll notice that the integer value is 5236. There's a direct one-to-one. I could put in here multiply by 1, but if I leave it as blank, that's what it's going to do. It's just not going to do any multiplication. It'll just convert the number buffer to the value and store it within the, that particular data ref. So that kind of gives you a feel for what you can do with setting data refs to specific values. Now, let's take a look at another one where we can have a couple of different ways to do it. The heading key is a good one to take a look at. So in the heading key, I have a numeric data ref here, which is the heading dial degrees magnetic for the pilot. Okay, and just like before, I could type in a value here and click on it, and that value is going to get stored within that data ref. And it's a direct one-to-one correlation, so I don't need to do any multiply by on what I want to put in there. But the other thing I can do with this is, particularly for a virtual device, I can manipulate this heading key using a drag operation. So I have the ability down here in the increment mode to specify an increment mode for this particular key, and I'm happy to use drag X. And what that means is as I click on the key and move my mouse back and forth, or if this were a touch monitor, most touch monitors, a mouse down, constant down is a double tap. I could double tap it and then drag my finger back and forth on the touch monitor, and I can adjust the heading that way. So that gives me two ways to manipulate that numeric data ref, either by typing in a number in the number buffer and then clicking on the key and having that actual value jammed in there, or through some kind of a drag operation. Okay, and when you do a drag operation, you have to set the mode, and there's all kinds of different increment modes here. We're going to actually explore some of the other ones in a minute. You have a minimum value. In our case, this is like a radial or a degree, so it's going to be a minimum of 0, a maximum value of 360. And what's going to end up happening is, because it's a drag wrap, if I try to drag it past 360, it's going to wrap it back around to 0, again. Also going back the other way is if I try to move it below 0, it'll set it okay to 360 and start counting down again. I also have this thing called the drag factor, which is basically how much do I want to move this data ref by for each pixel on the virtual device that I drag by. So I could set this to something where it's a little less sensitive. Like I put this to I think 0.01, and now when I drag, it'll drag a little bit slower. Okay, so you have a choice of how you want that to go. You do like 0.05. Makes it a little bit more responsive. Or if I set it to something like 0.01, it'll be even more responsive. 0.1 actually. That's what I wanted. Very responsive. So you can see how you could do that with a drag capability. You know what? One of the things I want to do is go back to this COM1. I do want to show you this numeric speech. You do have the ability to define when I enter in a value, into the numeric buffer, and I am actually going to take that data and jam it into the data ref, I can actually have X-KeyPad generate speech if I wanted to do that. And all you have to do is do an add speech logic test. I always set it to true for this particular example. And then it's, what do you want to say? Com1 set to, and then there's a special convention here, square brackets with a lowercase n or an uppercase n in there. And all that's going to do is take whatever the characters are that are in the number buffer, and it's going to inject it into that string. So an example here, if I type 121.6,
Com1 set to 121.6 megahertz.
let's take a look at it. Now a lowercase n means that it's going to call off, when it does the text to speech, it's going to do it as each individual character, or it's actually going to do it as a number, 121.5 megahertz. If I put this to an uppercase n, it's going to actually call out each character individually. Each. So let's set it to 125.95.
Com1 set to 125.95 megahertz.
So notice in that case it said 125.95 rather than 125.95. So just depends on how you want to hear it. And again, numeric speech is completely optional. You don't have to define it on the keys if you want. And even if you did define it, you actually have the ability. Let me just drag this over here really quick in the settings. To shut it off. You can either disable numeric speech or you could disable command speech. And the command speech, we discussed that in one of the previous tutorials. So you could define them on the keys and then globally shut them off, on the X-KeyPad settings, or don't bother putting them in at all if you don't really want to be hearing speech when, various things are being set or manipulated within X-KeyPad. Okay, let's take a look at another example. So another operation we could do besides incrementing things up and down with like a drag operation, I actually can do a set. I can actually set a specific constant value in a key. Let's take a look at the VFR key here that I have. This key, what it does is it will jam 1200 into the transponder code, regardless of what I have the transponder set to. So if I have the transponder, let's say, set to 5222.
Transponder set to 5222.
When I click on this VFR key, it's going to set it to 1200. So let's take a look at how that's defined. On the numeric data ref, we're now going to have an increment operation of set. The minimum value is 0, the maximum value is 7777, and the value I want to set to is 1200 when I click on that key. So that's one of the ways you can actually say, when I click on a key, I want to jam a constant value, into a particular, data ref. Okay, let's take a look at the transponder mode. Now, on the Cessna 172, I actually could not find any particular operations within that aircraft where there was not a command behind it. So example, on the transponder mode, there is actually a command, two commands within the Cessna 172, that one command will increment the mode up, as if you were clicking the transponder mode rotary to the right. And there was a command to decrement the transponder mode when you rotated that transponder mode rotary, to the left. Okay. But I wanted to show you that in some situations you may run into a payware aircraft or a custom aircraft where, for whatever reason, the aircraft designer never gave you commands to manipulate things that are in the 3D cockpit, but they may have given you a writable data ref that represents the mode or the state of something. And in that case, you can use X-KeyPad to increment that data ref up and down so that you can have a key that represents the actions within the 3D cockpit. So I've done this with the transponder mode. Even though there's commands, I've done it with a numeric data ref just to show you how it can get done. So let's take a look at this
Transponder on.
let's take a look at this transponder key and how it's defined. So on the numeric data ref, I have the transponder mode, which is an integer value that goes between 0 and 4. It represents the various transponder modes. Here's an example.
Transponder standby.
That happens to be a value of 1.
Transponder off.
Off, it's 0.
Transponder standby. Transponder on. Transponder altitude mode.
Altitude mode is a value of 3.
Transponder test.
Test, it's a value of 4. Okay? So how can I increment this thing up and down with each key press? Now, in a virtual device, I've got the ability to basically sense where on the key I pressed, okay? So if I have an increment mode of right click up, that means if I click on the right-hand side of the key, indicated by the little arrows that I put in here in this key definition, I'm going to want to increment that data ref up to its maximum value of 4, okay? Now, if I click on the left, that's the opposite of a right click. You know, it's sort of like the inversion of it. So by definition, the way this works is if I don't do a right click and I do a left click, what that's going to mean is I'm going to decrement. I'll move the data ref, subtract a 1 from it and bring it down to its minimum value. And once I get to those states, it's going to stop. So example, if I keep clicking over here,
Transponder test. Transponder test.
you're going to find out that it just doesn't go any further than 4. Okay? Now, there are a lot of other increment modes up here. You've got things like increment up to the limits. And that's typically used on actually the X-Touch Mini when we've got rotary encoders, okay? You've got wrap mode, which means that as I increment it up, and this would be typically used on like a PI engineering hardware key, where I don't have the ability to sense whether I touched on the left-hand side of the key or the right-hand side of the key. Just each key press, I got one operation I could do. And in this mode, I could have it where as I click on the transponder, key, it will keep incrementing up until I get to the maximum value. And with wrap, it'll wrap back around to 0 again. I could do it where it goes up, down. So I increment it up to the maximum value. And if I click on it again, it'll reverse and start going down to the minimum value. And then if I, click it again, it'll start going back up again. So there's a lot of different increment modes here that you can use. And typically the ones on the lower set of the list, they're what you might use with a hardware device where you don't have the ability to do things like, drag a key on a PI engineering hardware keyboard. You don't have the ability to detect whether you clicked on the left or the right side or the top or the bottom. But when you get into virtual devices, you've got a lot more control over things. You can sense where did I touch the key? Did I do a drag operation on it? So there's more increment modes that you can manipulate on the virtual devices. I'm not going to go through all of them. Best thing to do is just experiment with them. And you will see in the various samples, how they got used. All right, is there anything else we need to talk about on the numeric data ref? No, I think that pretty much covers it. So we've covered all the different ways that you can use them. And again, their primary uses are to enter a numeric value into something like a radio frequency, any of the autopilot parameters. That's one typical use for them. And the other typical use for them is being able to increment and decrement a numeric data ref value, typically in a situation where, for whatever reason, the aircraft designer did not give you a increment and decrement command on a 3D cockpit function, and you have no choice but to use a data ref to manipulate, to basically have a key replicate what you could normally do within the 3D cockpit. So I hope this helps you understand numeric data refs and how they're used. Definitely explore the various samples. You'll see they're used in a lot of different places. And I hope that you can use this in your configurations. Thank you very much for watching.